There are two types of power in this world. The kind everyone sees coming, and the kind that controls everything from the shadows. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago when he wrote The Prince, and what he discovered about human nature hasn't changed. Most people think power is about being the loudest voice in the room, the most impressive personality, the one everyone notices. But Machiavelli knew better. Real power isn't what you show, it's what you strategically withhold. And here's what nobody tells you. Every day in public settings you're being tested. Not by your boss, not by your competitors, but by opportunity itself. Every conversation, every meeting, every social interaction is a chance to either build your influence or accidentally destroy it. Today I'm going to show you 7 public habits that are silently killing your power. These aren't obvious mistakes like being rude or aggressive. These are subtle behaviors that seem harmless, even relatable, but they're destroying your reputation and influence without you realizing it. By the end of this video you'll understand why the most powerful people in history never made these mistakes, and more importantly, you'll know exactly what to do instead. Because Machiavelli didn't just identify these problems, he gave us the solutions. Let's start with the most dangerous habit of all. But before then, kindly turn on notifications and subscribe to my channel where we reveal the unchanging truths about human psychology. Habit 1. Complaining in public. Here's something most people get completely wrong about human psychology. They think complaining makes them relatable. They believe that sharing their frustrations will generate sympathy and connection. Machiavelli would call this emotional suicide. When you complain in public, you're broadcasting 2 fatal messages that destroy your power instantly. First, you're announcing that you don't have control over your circumstances. Second, you're asking for sympathy, which positions you as someone who needs something rather than someone who provides value. Machiavelli observed that powerful people endure pain without broadcasting it. They understand that the moment you share your frustration publicly, you create a new identity in people's minds. You're no longer mysterious, no longer someone they need to impress or fear. You become someone who needs help. And here's the brutal truth. People don't follow those who need help. They follow those who seem unshakable. So what do you do instead? You master what I call strategic endurance. When you're under pressure, when things aren't going your way, you maintain perfect composure in public. Not fake positivity that's transparent and weak, but genuine emotional control. Let them wonder how you never seem to flinch. Let them question whether anything actually bothers you. This creates a psychological advantage that's worth more than any sympathy you might gain from complaining. Habit 2. Seeking validation for your decisions. This habit is more subtle, but it's absolutely lethal to your authority. It happens when you make a decision and then immediately look around for approval or agreement. Do you think that was the right call? What do you guys think about this approach? I hope I'm making sense here. Every time you seek validation for a decision you've already made, you're essentially asking permission retroactively. And Machiavelli understood that permission seekers never become rulers. Here's what happens psychologically when you seek validation. You transfer ownership of your choices to the group. Even if they eventually agree with you, the fact that you needed their approval means they now see themselves as co-decision makers rather than followers of your leadership. Machiavelli wrote about this extensively. He noted that effective rulers make decisions and then shape reality around those decisions. They don't ask if the decision was right, they make it right through execution and confidence. So what's the alternative? Master what I call decisive closure. When you make a decision, present it as a conclusion, not a proposal. Instead of, what do you think about doing X? You say, we're doing X. Here's how we'll implement it. If people have concerns, address them factually, but never frame it as though your decision is up for debate. You might say, I understand the concern about timing. Here's why this approach will work despite that challenge. Notice the difference? You're acknowledging input without surrendering authority. You're showing you've considered alternatives without suggesting you need permission. This single shift in how you present decisions can transform how people perceive your leadership capabilities. They stop seeing you as someone who hopes to be right and start seeing you as someone who makes things right. Habit 3. Over-explaining your success. Here's a counterintuitive truth that destroys most people's power. explaining your success makes it seem smaller. When something goes well for you, when you achieve something significant, the natural human impulse is to share the story. To explain how it happened, what you did, how hard you worked. It seems like the humble, relatable thing to do. But Machiavelli understood that mystery is more powerful than transparency. Think about the most influential people you know. When they succeed, they don't give you a detailed breakdown of their process. They might acknowledge the success, but they keep the mechanics private. This creates what psychologists call the competence assumption. People assume that if you can achieve results without making a big deal about how difficult it was, you must be exceptionally capable. Here's why this works. When you over-explain your success, you accidentally minimize it. You make it seem like anyone could have done it if they just followed your steps. But when you let success speak for itself, people assume there's something special about you that made it possible. Machiavelli called this the preservation of mystique. He knew that the moment people fully understand how you operate, they stop being impressed by your operations. But there's a crucial balance here. You're not being secretive or arrogant. You're simply being selective about what you reveal. When someone congratulates you on an achievement, you say, "Thank you, I appreciate that," instead of launching into the behind-the-scenes story. If they ask for specifics, you can share strategic insights without revealing your internal process. You might say, "The key was focusing on timing," without explaining your entire decision-making framework. This approach serves two purposes. It maintains your mystique while still providing value to others. People get useful insight without losing respect for your capabilities. Remember, competence that requires no explanation is the most convincing competence of all. Habit 4. Taking sides in office politics. Nothing destroys your power faster than getting dragged into other people's conflicts. Yet this is exactly what most people do because they think it shows loyalty or principle. Machiavelli had a brutal but effective rule. Never become involved in the quarrels of others unless you stand to gain significantly from the outcome. Here's what happens when you publicly take sides in workplace disputes or social conflicts. You automatically gain enemies without necessarily gaining valuable allies. The person you support might appreciate your loyalty, but everyone on the other side now sees you as an opponent. Even worse, you reveal your decision-making process to everyone watching. They now know what triggers your loyalty, what values override your strategic thinking, and how to predict your future behavior. This is what Machiavelli called strategic neutrality. It's not cowardice or indecision, it's the preservation of future options. Here's how you implement this. When colleagues try to pull you into their conflicts, you acknowledge without committing. Instead of, "You're absolutely right, Sarah is being unreasonable," you say, "I can see why that would be frustrating." You validate their experience without endorsing their position. If they push harder for you to take a stand, you redirect to outcomes. What would be the ideal resolution from your perspective? This shows engagement while avoiding alliance. The goal isn't to never have opinions or values. The goal is to avoid public declarations that limit your future influence. Fight the battles that matter to your objectives, not the battles that matter to your emotions. Permanent enemies are expensive luxuries. Smart leaders collect allies and avoid creating unnecessary opposition. Habit 5. Showing desperation for opportunities. There's a specific energy that kills deals, ruins interviews, and destroys partnerships before they even begin. Machiavelli called it the stench of need, and it's one of the most power-destroying forces in human interaction. When you want something too much, when your desperation becomes visible, you immediately lose negotiating power. People can sense hunger and they instinctively exploit it. Think about job interviews you've had. The ones where you performed best, were those the jobs you desperately needed, or the ones you were curious about but didn't desperately want? Most people perform better when they have options, when they're not operating from scarcity. This happens because desperation changes your behavior in subtle but destructive ways. Your voice gets slightly higher. You agree too quickly. You oversell yourself. You laugh a little too hard at their jokes. You position yourself as grateful for their consideration rather than valuable to their objectives. Machiavelli understood that the person who needs the deal less controls the deal. This doesn't mean being disinterested or arrogant. It means projecting what I call selective interest. You're engaged because the opportunity has merit, not because you're desperate for any opportunity. Here's how you implement this. Before any important interaction where you want something, remind yourself of 3 alternatives. Even if those alternatives aren't perfect, having them in mind changes your energy. You're no longer operating from scarcity. When discussing opportunities, focus on value exchange rather than gratitude. Instead of, I would be so grateful for this chance, say, I see potential for mutual benefit here. Instead of, this would be perfect for me, say, this aligns well with what I'm building. The key is positioning yourself as someone who has choices. Not because you're trying to play games, but because people with choices make better decisions and command more respect. Notice successful people in negotiations. They never seem like they need the deal. They seem like they want the right deal. That distinction is worth millions in lifetime negotiations. Habit 6. Breaking character under pressure. Here's where most people's power dies. The moment when pressure reveals who they really are underneath their professional persona. You know what I'm talking about. The meeting that goes wrong and suddenly their voice gets sharp. The criticism that hits too close to home and their composure cracks. The unexpected challenge and their confidence turns into defensiveness. Machiavelli observed that true power is measured not by how you act when things go well, but by how unshakable you remain when everything goes wrong. People are always watching for cracks in your armor. Not because they're malicious but because they need to know who they can rely on when stakes are high. The moment your mask slips, the moment they see you flustered, angry, or panicked, you lose what Machiavelli called the presumption of control. Here's the psychology. When people see you remain calm in chaos, they make an assumption about your character. They assume that if this level of stress doesn't shake you, you must be operating from a position of strength they can't see. This is what Machiavelli called armor of the mind. Your ability to absorb pressure without showing damage becomes a form of psychological intimidation. But this isn't about suppressing emotions or being robotic. It's about controlling the timing and location of your emotional responses. You can feel frustrated, disappointed, or angry, but you choose when and where to process those feelings. In public, under pressure, you maintain what I call strategic stillness. Your voice stays level. Your posture remains strong. Your facial expression stays neutral or slightly amused, never defensive or panicked. Later, in private, you can process the emotions and plan your response. But in the moment, your unshakable presence becomes your greatest asset. Next time you feel pressure rising, take a breath and make your response 20% slower than your instinct. This single technique will transform how people perceive your emotional intelligence and leadership capacity. Habit 7. Publicly defending yourself against criticism. This final habit might be the most counterintuitive, but it's also the most powerful when you master it. When someone criticizes you publicly, every instinct tells you to defend yourself. To explain your position, justify your actions, prove them wrong. It seems like the natural, rational response. But Machiavelli knew that the moment you defend yourself, you validate the attack. You're essentially agreeing that the criticism deserves a response, which elevates its importance and gives your critic control over the narrative. Here's what happens psychologically when you defend yourself. The audience stops evaluating whether the criticism was valid and starts evaluating whether your defense was convincing. You've shifted from being in control to being in reaction. Even worse, public defense often comes across as weakness, not strength. It suggests that their opinion matters so much to you that you feel compelled to change it. This is what Machiavelli called strategic indifference. You're not ignoring legitimate feedback, but you're refusing to let criticism control your public narrative. Here's how you implement this. When criticized publicly, you have 3 responses available. First, acknowledge without defending. I can understand why you might see it that way. Second, redirect to outcomes. Let's focus on results and evaluate from there. Third, defer to private. That's worth a deeper conversation. Let's talk after this meeting. Notice that none of these responses validate the criticism, but none dismiss it arrogantly either. You're simply refusing to let someone else's agenda control your public presence. The most powerful people I know have mastered this completely. When attacked, they don't defend, they absorb the attack like armor and remain focused on their objectives. This creates an almost supernatural level of confidence in observers. But here's the advanced technique. Sometimes let others defend you. When you've built enough respect and influence, other people in the room will often push back on your behalf. This is infinitely more powerful than defending yourself because it demonstrates that your reputation doesn't depend on your words, it depends on your track record. Now you understand why these 7 habits are so destructive. Each one reveals something about you that powerful people never reveal. That you need approval, that you can be rattled, that you operate from scarcity, that you can be controlled by others' agendas. But understanding the problem is only half the solution. The real transformation happens when you replace these habits with what Machiavelli called strategic behaviors. Instead of complaining, you master endurance. Instead of seeking validation, you project confidence in your decisions. Instead of over-explaining success, you let results speak for themselves. Instead of taking sides, you maintain strategic neutrality. Instead of showing desperation, you operate from abundance. Instead of breaking under pressure, you become unshakable. Instead of defending yourself, you let your reputation handle criticism. This isn't about becoming cold or manipulative. This is about understanding that true power comes from self-control, strategic thinking, and the ability to play the long game. Machiavelli's advice has survived 5 centuries because it's based on unchanging truths about human psychology. People respect what they can't fully understand. They follow those who seem unshakable. They trust those who control their own narrative. Your power isn't destroyed by your enemies, it's destroyed by your own unconscious habits. But now you know better. Start with 1 habit. Master it completely before moving to the next. And remember, the goal isn't to impress people with your transformation. The goal is to let them gradually realize that something fundamental has changed about how you move through the world. That's when you'll understand what Machiavelli really meant when he wrote about power. It's not something you chase or display. It's something you become. If you enjoyed this video and you are drawn to ideas like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is built for minds like yours. Don't forget to like this video, and if this message hits you somewhere deep, then drop a comment below. I read and reply to every comment.